Radio War, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, today is Thursday, Dahlia Thursday here on Black Box Online Radio. On Thursdays I talk to you guys about the Black Dahlia, the murder of Elizabeth Short from 1947, one of the most horrific crimes in American history. And in this episode, I will be looking at the book Killer Psychopaths by Paul Roland, as well as responding to a video from Larry Harnish, who's going to be discussing George Hodel as a Black Dahlia suspect, as well as the Black Dahlia Avenger series. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Black Dahlia. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. So the Black Dahlia case is something that I am a newcomer to. When I was watching that Larry Harnish video, I was very keen to note that he said that he had been following the Black Dahlia case since 1996. And if you're absolutely brand new to this channel, how long have I been following the Black Dahlia case? 3 weeks. No, that's not really true. I've been in and out of the Black Dahlia mystery over the years, but Black Dahlia Thursday here on Black Box Online Radio has been going on for 3 weeks, and I'm fully aware that that doesn't mean that I will know everything, and I am also not presenting any of the information in this series as I'm some type of expert who knows everything about the case, or I'm even some type of expert that knows everything about true crime. What I am doing is looking at different sources and responding to them, giving commentary on them, looking at the ideas that make sense. And I will also share something that I frequently quote on this channel, and it comes to us from Brian Davis, who is the host of the Tate LaBianca radio program. And he stated that it takes 4 years to learn the people who are involved with a true crime case. And I don't think he meant just the names. I think he meant to learn who's a good actor, who's a bad actor, who is a source that you can trust, who is a source that you cannot trust. Did this person do deceptive things to try and manipulate the narrative? Is this person mostly honest, and are they just putting everything out in a straightforward way? So I'm going to definitely keep that stuff in mind. But I want to pick up with some things from the last week's episode on Dahlia Thursday, because I just want to share with you guys the things that I've been thinking about in regards to the case. Elizabeth Short was murdered in 1947. Her body was found in Southern California in more or less what's been described as a vacant lot. And a mother and her daughter were out walking in the early morning, and by early morning I do mean, though, well after sunrise, and they found Elizabeth Short's body, which they thought was a department store mannequin, because she had been cut and separated through the second and third lumbar vertebrae. Her body was placed approximately 10 to 15 inches apart from the upper half to the lower half, and she had also been mutilated in a variety of ways. Now, some people were asking about whether or not she had been raped prior to the murder. I think it's quite possible, and if you even get on the Wikipedia page, it says that there was some very odd contact that had been made with her anus, which should suggest that she had been raped in that way. As terrible as that sounds, and I want to give a very big disclaimer, I'm going to be talking about some horrible things in this episode, so, just advisory. But as far as the actions and activities of the killer and what the killer was thinking, there's a very big theory out there that this was done because of a type of surrealist art murder. And this mostly is connected to a suspect named George Hodel, whom I'll be discussing later. And it's the idea that George Hodel wanted to recreate a photograph from a photographer named Man Ray called the Minotaur, which had the woman's arms up the way that Elizabeth Short's were, and the Minotaur has the breasts of the woman that are used as the eyes, and he was trying to create a type of surrealist art murder. And I'm not really seeing any evidence to support that as of now. Again, as a total newcomer, everything that I'm seeing about this case seems extremely personal, especially if it's possible that there was sexual contact. It seems like this person was trying to get revenge on Elizabeth Short. It seems like this person wanted to degrade her, to humiliate her, to torture her, because there was excrement in her system that she had ingested prior to her death, as well as, of course, to not only humiliate her on the personal level, to let everybody in Southern California know that this person had been murdered in such a horrific way. The killer definitely wanted to send a message by having her body posed and laid out on the ground. And we are going to hear a little bit more about that in Paul Roland's book. Paul Roland is a former criminal profiler with the FBI, and he wrote a book called Killer Psychopaths. And I was actually looking for something else in his book. I've discussed it on Ripper Wednesday when I was talking about Jack the Ripper, and I was flipping through it and trying to find a particular sentence that he had written, but I came across the chapter called Silent Witness. And it says, unless the victim was clearly a target of indiscriminate violence, the team will start by studying their lifestyle, relationships, and background in minute detail. Okay, silent witness, meaning that the victim, the murder victim, is the silent witness. And already, this is almost looking like there's some type of personal connection that is going on with Elizabeth Short. I mean, everything is just so intimate and so direct, and it just seems like this person really had some type of specific problem with her, and I can only provide one alternative, and that is that perhaps the Black Dahlia Avenger, or the murderer, had some type of obsession with her physical appearance. Maybe this wasn't done specifically for revenge on her, but just the way that she looked was triggered some type of desire in the Black Dahlia Avenger. But I'm going to keep reading in Paul Roland's book, because this is very specific stuff to the type of murderer that committed the Black Dahlia Avenger crime. If a victim has been mutilated an hour or more after the estimated time of death, it can indicate that the killer is older and more experienced. Now, with Elizabeth Short, it's very difficult to say when the mutilations occurred, because it's quite possible that her body was refrigerated for a period of time. If I can give my honest answer, I think that her body was damaged before and after death, and the exact times I cannot tell you because, again, it's quite difficult, but I think that she definitely experienced abuse and torturous activities while she was still alive, and she was definitely handled, and like things were done to her post-mortem. Goes without saying. Specifically, she was cut in half, and then the intestines were neatly packed into the lower portion of her body. I mean, these are horrible things, but I believe that the killer was handling her body before and after death. But, does this suggest someone who is older and more experienced? I think there's insufficient evidence to say that as of now. It will not be his first murder, as he evidently felt sufficiently confident to return to indulge his sadistic fantasy and could be on an escalating cycle of violence. Escalating cycle of violence? So many of you guys have even said this in the comments section. It seems like we're dealing with a serial killer. I mean, this does not seem like a typical one-off murder, where even if somebody really had a problem with Elizabeth Short for whatever reason, that this was the only type of murder that they were going to commit, just do it once and never do it again. I do see hallmarks of a serial killer. And going on to the next sentence, but it is important for investigators to be able to distinguish between pre- and post-mortem mutilations. It is comparatively simple to determine if a wound has been made post-mortem, as the incision will be bloodless and the edges of the wound will be dry. Many female victims are an attempt at defeminization. Typically, a breast might have been cut open or a foreign object has been inserted into the vagina. Absolutely, this is relevant to Elizabeth Short. She was defeminized, her breasts were cut, and there is that cut that was made all the way down to her vagina. Now, maybe not foreign penetration, but absolutely her breasts were cut, and there was defeminization. These acts are not necessarily that of a sadistic psychopath. The nature of the offender will be determined by whether or not the mutilations were caused while the victims were alive. If a breast has been cut open after death, it would suggest that there was curiosity. But the insertion of an object into the vagina after death, provided that there is no evidence of force, is a fact that is establishing the pathologist's need to know whether the offender was probing or humiliating the victim. Once again, like, what's the killer doing? Is he probing Elizabeth Short? Is he cutting her apart because of curiosity? Or is he cutting her apart because of revenge? I mean, I'm definitely on the revenge scale. I think that this would be like 70% revenge, 30% some type of bizarre, twisted, psychotic curiosity. We have to remember John Douglas's psychological profile for the Black Dahlia Avenger, which I discussed last week, where he said, this person might be dealing with a mental illness or combinations of mental illnesses, possibly psychotic, but with the ability to control themselves in their daily lives, the ability to hide these types of mental issues and psychotic issues. So with this situation, I'm seeing that, as I said, 70% I think that this person is doing it because they have a specific problem with Elizabeth Short. Again, all of the clues I think are very personal. Again, this is defeminization. This person is targeting her because they want to humiliate her. I mean, I think it would be 70% humiliation, 70% just trying to go after the victim in a specific way, and then 30% is a genuine type of medical curiosity. If there is evidence that the breast was cut and the object was inserted while alive, it would suggest torture. Only the sociopath commits a sadistic assault while the victim is alive. The psychotic will be responsible for the defeminization and post-mortem acts of curiosity. As I said, I think there's clear evidence that Elizabeth Short was hurt while she was alive, so I mean, we're dealing most likely with somebody who's a sociopath or psychopath, but let's keep going. The choice of the location, open or secluded, and the evidence he leaves behind will suggest whether or not he was forensically aware or of high and low or average intelligence. Alright, so now we're getting to some very important stuff. Was the killer of high intelligence, low intelligence, or average intelligence? If the body has been dumped in an open area with no attempt to conceal it, the killer is showing contempt for the victim. A body that has been dragged and dumped tells the investigators that the perpetrator wanted to delay the discovery and to be clear of the area, and he felt that he had time to cover his tracks. And a first-time killer wouldn't be so deliberate. Well, with the murder of Elizabeth Short, I already told you she was found in more or less a vacant lot, and her body was found on the ground. Now, it does appear that she was indeed posed and wasn't simply dropped there, because, as I said in last week's episode, there was morning dew that was on her face, suggesting that she had been placed face down and then turned over and then posed into that specific position. But she was absolutely left in an open area. And if the body has been dumped with no attempt to conceal it, the killer is showing contempt for the victim. And I suppose that it's possible that this type of surrealist art murder could take place, and that it could be both. It's a revenge killing, but someone has a surrealist art motivation. But for somebody like me, who is just trying to analyze the facts, I would say that the surrealist art angle doesn't appear to be very factual. That almost appears to be a type of mental conjecture that has been placed on top of this. I'm not really seeing anything that would indicate that this is a type of surrealist art murder. Instead, it seems like somebody did not like Elizabeth Short. They wanted to punish her. They wanted to humiliate her. And again, they wanted her murder to be known to everybody, to as many people as possible, and to know that this is what happened to Elizabeth Short. So in some ways, that's also a display of power. But let's keep going with the book here. If there were no tracks or prints other than the killer's, it's safe to assume that the body had been carried or placed there. If the corpse was dressed and made presentable with an attempt to restore dignity in death, it would suggest that the Bureau is doing something called psychic erasure or restitution. This remorse or belated attempt to make good would not be evident in psychotics or sociopaths. Absolutely, that didn't happen with Elizabeth Short, that the killer would have dressed her and felt bad. Oh no, I've made a mistake. What have I done? No, I think it's the exact opposite. So definitely more on the sociopathic and psychotic side, where this person is trying to demonstrate, I committed the crime, I'm going to get away with it. This is what I did to this woman because she either did something to him, or as I said, I left one possibility on the table, and that is that Elizabeth Short could have just had a particular type of appearance that bothered him. He reminded her of somebody else. He reminded him of his mother. And maybe he just found her to be attractive and she rejected him. Maybe she didn't even say anything at all and he just pre-chose her because of the way that she looks. So many possibilities exist in an unsolved case. But let's keep going with the book here. And it says that the same is true if there is evidence of repeated blows or stab wounds to the face, which can be an attempt to obliterate the victim. Well, Elizabeth Short's face was mutilated, as I've said in many episodes, and you guys already know this. She had the famous Glasgow grin, where she was cut with more or less an incision creating an ear-to-ear smile, multiple incisions creating an ear-to-ear smile. And I don't necessarily think that that was meant to completely destroy her identity. Instead, I think that that was meant to show that the killer had power over her and he had the ability to do something like that. And then this might not be the most relevant statement, but I'll read the final paragraph. If he used whatever object was at hand to injure or kill the victim, it would suggest that he was a disorganized offender acting on impulse, as opposed to an organized offender who would have planned the crime by bringing burglary tools and a weapon. Well, I mean, I know I said that that wasn't particularly relevant to this case because it's really not. I mean, we know exactly which one of those two would be more likely to be true. Did somebody just make this up? Did somebody just grab whatever tools were around and commit this crime? No, almost certainly not. Clearly, Elizabeth Short was taken somewhere, and she was restrained, and she was cut apart, and she was tortured. Horrible things happened to her. This was the type of person who did this in a very organized way, using either their own weapons and materials, or, again, having access to their weapons and materials. So I think that that pretty much goes without saying. And I think that the statement that was made by Paul Roland, again, this is not a Black Dahlia chapter in his book, I think that that would be much more relevant to offenders who commit the crimes impulsively, that are just like they see somebody walking down the street and they want to go after them, and then they're just going to use whatever they have at hand. All right, that type of impulsive crime. But with the Black Dahlia case, there are deliberate and specific calculated measures that the killer took. I mean, the killer did this stuff on his own time, and it was all unnecessary. I mean, he could have murdered her so easily, but he took the time to mutilate her body in a very particular way and to dump her body in a way that would expose her. I mean, firstly, like, what exactly do you think the motivation was for the killer to dump Elizabeth Short's body in that way? Or I should say, perhaps discard or place her body in the lot that way? I mean, I think that I'm pretty much going to just use Paul Roland's book here, as well as John Douglas's book, as well as just perhaps everything else, and say, act of humiliation, this person's trying to defeminize the victim, they hate women. And another thing that I've thought about, even though it is purely a bit of guesswork on my part, but I would suspect that the Black Dahlia Avenger had experienced some type of sexual abuse in his life, maybe at a young age, and maybe the sexual abuse had been some type of bad relationship with a woman, but it could be from a man that he was a victim of some type of sexual abuse. It could also be that he was having some major sexual dysfunction in his life. And I mean, I'm definitely seeing some type of sexual problem that's going on with the Black Dahlia Avenger. But I told you guys that I would discuss multiple subjects within this episode, and I would love to know what you think about anything in regards to killer psychopaths and their descriptions of killers. And what do you think Paul Roland's words in the Silent Witness chapter say about the victim? I mean, this is someone who's clearly not afraid, wants to humiliate her. This is somebody who is organized in their thinking, but they might actually be what John Douglas called disorganized in their thinking, but living an organized life. They may have done this for a very psychotic reason, or they may have done this as a very intense act of revenge. Let me know what you think in the comments section down below. But I told you guys that I was watching the Larry Harnish videos, I have to give a shout out to Lehman, who sent them to me at blackboxonlineradio at AOL.com. And Lehman stated that if you want to look at an authority on the case, he would recommend looking at Larry Harnish and to stay away from Steve Hodel. I think what Lehman said in his first comment on my Black Dahlia series was that there's too much George Hodel in my series, and I could easily see why from watching the very first video that I just pulled up from Larry Harnish's channel. He does not like Steve Hodel, and he does not like George Hodel as a Black Dahlia Avenger suspect. And he more or less did a debunking video of Steve Hodel's claims about George Hodel being the Black Dahlia Avenger on his channel, and I guess I just have to read off this one message from Steve Hodel that he sent to me, and this relates to debunking his claims because I've interacted with Steve Hodel in the past, but purely in regards to the Zodiac case, and I made a video in my old Zodiac debunking series about his suspect, George Hodel, whom he claims was both the Black Dahlia Avenger and the Zodiac Killer. So let's have a read from Steve Hodel here. Before debunking my investigations, I would suggest that you read the complete books on them. Most Evil 1, where I do not claim that my father was the Zodiac, but do ask law enforcement to obtain DNA and compare it to the DNA I submitted on my father, George Hill Hodel. In Most Evil 2, the results of several years of follow-up investigation, I do make the claim that exists, and there is enough evidence to make the claim that he is the Zodiac. The linkage is too much, and trying to only present a few points. My claim is that George Hodel is the self-titled Black Dahlia Avenger, the self-proclaimed Black Dahlia Avenger, and he used that name in the 1940s, and he simply reinvented it again and named himself Zodiac in the late 1960s and terrorized San Francisco as he did in Los Angeles in the 1940s. I present 32 identical signatures between the Black Dahlia Avenger and the Zodiac. I investigated 300 murders during my career at the LAPD. And the suggested reading order for my books is to read Black Dahlia Avenger 1, Most Evil 1, Black Dahlia Avenger 2, Most Evil 2, and Black Dahlia Avenger 3, to read them in that order, interlacing his Black Dahlia Avenger series with his Most Evil series. And Most Evil Part 2 is the book where he talks about his father being the Zodiac Killer, but that's an older message, because there is also the book out there now called Black Dahlia Avenger 4. He's also been working on the series The Early Years. So as you can see already, Steve Hodel is a very prolific writer, and lots of people begin to point this out by saying that he is writing an enormous amount of books all on the same subject, all on crimes that were allegedly committed by his father, and he spends the majority of his interviews talking about his books rather than about the victims. I'm just sharing criticisms that people have put out over the years. Larry Harnish said it in his video, and other people said this when he did an interview with The Sun, and I wanted to read that message for him because this is not some type of bashing Steve Hodel segment. This is going to be genuinely challenging George Hodel as a Black Dahlia Avenger suspect. And if you do watch the episode that I was talking about from Larry Harnish, it was like a reaction video where he was responding to an interview, and almost every 15 seconds he would just call out Steve Hodel and say, he's saying something that is untrue. But what do you guys really make of George Hill Hodel as a Black Dahlia Avenger suspect so far? You know, at first, that he was somebody who was a medical doctor in Southern California who had been trained in surgery, even though he didn't primarily operate in surgery. He had lots of connections to powerful people. He was in charge of the venereal disease unit for Los Angeles and i.e. Hollywood. And would he have been the type of person to lure Elizabeth Short to his home or to a different location and commit this type of surgical murder? I really found that a lot of the claims from Larry Harnish try to go after the entirety of the narrative, because we have the Black Dahlia Avenger case in 1947. The murder of Elizabeth Short took place in 1947, but there is also a true crime story that is connected to George Hodel, and that is when his daughter Tamar Hodel accused him of sexual assault, and he went on trial in 1949. So I think that is something that is definitely relevant to the Black Dahlia case because it involves one of the major suspects in the case. And what Larry Harnish was just saying is that all of this stuff about Tamar Hodel being sexually abused by George Hodel is not even true, as she shared with not Steve Hodel, but Steve Hodel's half-brother Duncan Hodel, is that she made it up as a type of revenge plot. And I'm just sharing some stuff from his video, but the actions and activities of Tamar Hodel are very questionable. She told her daughter, Fauna Hodel, that she was half black and that her father was African American, and she just grew up for like 15 years or whatever it was thinking that she was half black and expecting that one day she'll darken. That's what they said about her, and that's why Fauna Hodel titled her book One Day She'll Darken, which is really just talking about some of the outrageous stories that happened in the Hodel family. And I don't doubt for a second that weird things happened, bizarre things happened, that there were types of family drama, but some of the things that are more relevant to the Black Dahlia Avenger case would be, well, did George Hodel actually do it? One point from Larry Harnish is that Steve Hodel claims that George Hill Hodel was the prime suspect in the Black Dahlia case, and he's like, no, he was never the prime suspect. He was a suspect. The prime suspect was named Red Manley, and there was another major suspect that was considered named Leslie Dillon. I want to do standalone episodes on both of them for this series, particularly Leslie Dillon. Once again, you can hit the like button if you want and subscribe if you haven't. If you have something to say about the Black Dahlia Avenger, you can put a comment down below. But I really want, this to be clear that this is an introductory episode. This is still the early part of the series. I told you we're 3 weeks in right now with this Black Dahlia case, so there's still a lot of ground to cover. I'm familiar with both of these suspects because of other true crime issues in the past, and casually looking at the Black Dahlia case over the years, but I would love to do full exposés on both of them, because I think that we're going to find ways to eliminate Red Manley early on. Leslie Dillon is going to be way more questionable as a type of Black Dahlia Avenger suspect, but George Hodel was not the prime suspect, he was just a suspect. Another point of evidence is the LA District Attorney Stephen Kay, who was more famous for the Manson trial and the Manson parole hearings, Stephen Kay is the prosecutor who worked very closely with the Manson family case, but he said publicly on CBS television that he believed that George Hodel was the Black Dahlia Avenger. And there was a type of police cover-up, but what Larry Harnish said in the debunking video was that he may have said that in the past, but he has since retracted those statements and does not talk about the Black Dahlia case anymore. Stephen Kay is also somebody who has really developed a very questionable type of reputation because a lot of people don't like his personality, they don't like his attitude, but they like how strictly he wanted to stand his ground when it came to the Manson parole hearings, just recognizing and reinforcing the horrible crimes that were committed by the Manson family. And yes, this is, as Charles Manson would call him, Stephen Kay from his mother. But yes, it's the same guy. So he has retracted his claim that he believes that George Hodel was the Black Dahlia Avenger. And also, Steve Hodel appeared at a Georgia book club, and that's where he was giving the presentation that Larry Harnish was responding to. And he made the claim that his father was also the Zodiac killer. And then he also held up a picture of George Hodel and a picture of the Zodiac Killer composite sketch and wanted to highlight the similarities, except he didn't use the conventional composite sketch. He used the one from the book Great Crimes of San Francisco by Dean Dickensheet. Okay. But yes, he used that one, and, Larry Harnish is just saying, this is not the Zodiac Killer composite sketch. This was an artist's rendering for a book cover, and he's just telling this person that he's giving this presentation to, who probably doesn't know any better, that it's on par with the composite sketches that were made after the Zodiac's final crime, the murder of Paul Stein. And of course, Steve Hodel brought up the French schoolteacher named Yves Persson, who found the 5 Celtic letters that can be put together to create the Zodiac Killer's flying V symbol, and the combination of the 5 letters in English would represent Hodel. This is evidence that George Hodel was the Zodiac Killer, and I do have a very simple response, and I've shared some iterations of this in the past, but I think I can say it more clearly now. For this Celtic letter theory to work with the Zodiac Killer's flying V symbol, I think you just need more. You need more of a Celtic influence. You need more Celtic connections. If the Zodiac were throwing around Celtic crosses and just like Celtic knots and all types of his letters, then you might have something to stand on. Because, yes, of course, the Zodiac symbol could actually be a Celtic cross. That's been talked about for years. But that's all an assumption. And I genuinely do not believe that Eve Persson has actually identified the 5 Celtic letters that have been put together for the Zodiac symbol, the flying V symbol, that is, because I think that there are more plausible explanations for the flying V symbol. Very simply, he stole it from the Red Rider coloring book and added 4 dots, or he stole it from some type of Red Rider themed memorabilia, merchandise, or maybe a comic book, and he could have done that arbitrarily, or he could have also done it because he thought that it was threatening and menacing. Maybe he added the 4 dots because it wanted to represent the 4 nights of Zodiac activity, something very simple like that. But this combination of 5 Celtic letters is one that I have trouble accepting. But, if this is the first thing that you've heard about the Zodiac Killer, you might be accepting that very willingly, but there are some deceptive issues that go on with the Great Crimes of San Francisco composite sketch, and then holding it up and saying, hey, this looks like George Hodel, this is the official police composite. Okay, you should not have done that, Steve Hodel. Absolutely not. I don't care how accurate you think it is, and I'm trying to give some leeway here. Even if you think that that's an accurate one, that does not mean that that is the official police composite, and it also doesn't mean that that's the one that the Robbins kids said was the most accurate. The Robbins kids being the witnesses that provided the details for the composite sketch. And I know that I said this is going to be a Black Dahlia Avenger series, Black Dahlia Thursday, but as you can see, it is inescapable to do this without connecting the Zodiac Killer to the Black Dahlia, because so many Zodiac Killer suspects are also Black Dahlia Avenger suspects, and it goes well beyond George Hodel. It also involves suspects like Ed Edwards, whom I was discussing on the most recent Zodiac Mondays. He gets accused of both crimes. Perhaps even Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers are tied into this, involved with David Gold's My Dance with the Zodiac Killer theory. I mean, there are going to be countless suspects that are going to get accused of both, and some people don't even have a suspect. They just think that the Black Dahlia Avenger of the 1940s morphed and evolved into the Zodiac Killer. But with this episode, do you see how we started? Very, very tightly focused, looking at the forensics, looking at the profiling. What does the nature of the crime say about the killer? And then it just goes into these wild, wacky personality issues. So I would like to redirect and actually look at something that has a little bit more substance. And I want to look at 2 comments that you guys left on last week's Black Dahlia Avenger episode for Dahlia Thursday. And the first comes to us from the Jasper, who says, Larry Harnish is great. He is worth your time listening to on this case. Very, very unlikely that Hodel was the true killer of Elizabeth Short. As for suspects in true crime cases, all the best suspects come with plausible narratives. You can never be too skeptical when an author or podcaster solves a true crime case. Oh, I think we saw a lot of that on the most recent Zodiac Monday with the Ed Edwards theory. And again, Ed Edwards is also a Black Dahlia Avenger suspect, but he's a suspect for everything, sadly. Oh yes, when some people claim that they have solved the case, they do, well, exactly what you guys said in the comments section. Pre-choosing a suspect, then trying to make the evidence fit, which is fundamentally wrong. And Larry Harnish openly called out Steve Hodel for that when he said, oh, well, the evidence just kept piling up, indicating that my father, George Hodel, was the Black Dahlia Avenger, and he committed all of these other crimes. And Larry Harnish said something to the effect of, no, that's not the evidence piling up. That's taking nonsense and piling it up on nonsense. And to be very fair to anybody, this goes well beyond the Hodel family. What I believe that we can say in the exact middle ground is pre-choosing a suspect and then finding clues that would make this suspect look more culpable, making the narrative seem like this suspect is the only person who could have done that. But anybody can do that. Anybody can choose an age-appropriate person who is in the area and try to make the suspect fit and ignore all the contrary evidence. So I think that there's a lot of that going on with the with the George Hodel things. Absolutely for the Zodiac case. I mean, let's just say insufficient evidence, and I don't find the evidence to be very credible. And you guys saw the book cover for yourselves. But I would also like to give a shout out to Don Spain, who left one on last week's Dahlia Thursday. This would have been a very good contender for the Comment of the Week award. The Comment of the Week is something that I started doing on Zodiac Monday, giving out an award for the best comment, and this one says, "Hi, Ned. I was talking out loud, word for word, what you were saying while you were recounting John Douglas's theory about the killer having his own house or his own vehicle. I think exactly as you on this. Why couldn't the perpetrator have access to a butcher shop, morgue, funeral home, warehouse, etc., and work-related vehicles? I have worked several jobs where I have had the keys to the premises and vehicles. I think John Douglas is smart, but he made a major mistake. He said a letter from Dennis Rader in the early 80s was certainly not from the killer. Turns out it was." Don Spain, thank you so much for that. You can have an honorary Comment of the Week award. But in all seriousness, I mean, this is what I was talking about when I was responding to John Douglas's book, The Cases That Haunt Us, when he's like, okay, so the killer clearly brought Elizabeth Short's body to the dump site. I mean, for lack of a better term, that's what I'm going to call it. That would indicate that he had his own vehicle, and he also had his own house where he could have committed the crime. And I'm just reading the book thinking, now, wait a second. Couldn't he have had access to a work-related location and a work-related vehicle? And Don Spain outlined that so clearly, because what he was saying is something that I think we need to consider. John Douglas even conceded in The Cases That Haunt Us that the Black Dahlia Avenger might not even be a medical doctor, but a skilled butcher or slaughterman. And think about something like a warehouse or an industrial facility, a place where it's going to have lots of equipment, lots of tools, and also a refrigerator that's going to be large enough to house Elizabeth Short's body if she were indeed refrigerated. This is just a personal note, and this is not going to be the most eye-opening revelation in the Black Dahlia Avenger case, but I couldn't fit a body in my refrigerator. We have a mini fridge for my whole home, and multiple people do live here, but we just have a mini fridge. And in the present day, a lot of people could fit Elizabeth Short's body in their home refrigerators. Not everybody, not me, but an industrial refrigerator would be absolutely easier to place a body like Elizabeth Short's if that's indeed what happened. Also, we're going to be dealing with things like restraints, dealing with things like meat hooks. I mean, not saying that those were used, but this is the type of storage facility that would be completely appropriate to use for Elizabeth Short's dismembering. So something like a butcher or a slaughterman seems a little bit more likely. And also, what we have to remember is access to the vehicle. I mean, Don Spain said it clearly, clear as day. Sometimes people are going to have a work-related vehicle that is not theirs. A truck. Or he even brought up the thing like a hearse for a funeral home. Things like that could be used to transport the body. But as you can tell, I'm leaning a little bit more toward this being a type of industrial environment where Elizabeth Short was murdered, but one of you guys also pointed out in the comments section that very clearly this person had the luxury of time. Yes, that could be a house. I'm not opposed to that, okay? It's just I don't dismiss the workplace theory outright. I mean, this person could have had anywhere that would have given them privacy and the luxury of time. Clearly the luxury of time that was used. All right, well, maybe some type of industrial location where they knew that they would not be interrupted. But I'm just seeing that would be the place to do it. That would have access to very large drains. It would have access, as I said, to all the types of equipment that a person would want or need to commit a crime like that. And let me know what you think. Do you think that the Black Dahlia Avenger was George Hodel? Or are you leaning more towards something like what I was saying, that this was some type of industrial-based murder where somebody had a direct personal connection to Elizabeth Short, and they zeroed in on her for a very specific reason, and then they wanted to do this as an act of humiliation and degradation, and also, as Paul Roland said, defeminization. Now, Steve Hodel recommends that you read his books in an interlocking way, go from Black Dahlia Avenger 1 to Most Evil 1, but I would also just let you know the title of the book that I was reading earlier was Killer Psychopaths by Paul Roland. just citing my sources for this episode, as well as Larry Harnish's YouTube channel, and I also read the comment from the Jasper to show that multiple people recommended Larry Harnish's videos, so I'm going to keep going through those. And if you want to keep going with me on this Black Dahlia series, this is something that is very, very new. We're on episode number 3 right now. Next week will be episode number 4. Please stay tuned. And this show also comes to you Monday through Friday. On Mondays, I talk about the Zodiac Killer. On Tuesdays, about JonBenet Ramsey. On Thursdays, about Jack the Ripper. On Thursdays, about Jack the Ripper. On Wednesdays, about Jack the Ripper. Ripper Wednesday. On Thursdays, about the Black Dahlia. And on Friday, about D.B. Cooper. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com. buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. That's all for me now, and I will see you tomorrow for a new episode about D.B. Cooper. Until next time.